Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hard-working Americans and their families?
You will! This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefits in your benefit plan. Now prepare to learn,
Plan,
save,
and protect with the FIA Group.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Empowering Plans Podcast. It is a blast from the past episode here because I am your host, Corey Crigger, and I'm joined by none other than Nick Bonds. Nick, it feels like it's been a year since we've hopped on this podcast together, and I could not be more excited to be doing a end-of-the-year podcast with you. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, Corey. I'm good. It does feel it's been a minute since you and I were on the podcast mics together, but I'll see if I can work in any TLC references on this call.
I think it may have been by design after our last very punny episode of the Empowering Plans podcast that somehow I was partnered with Ron for a while. Maybe that was some institutional oversight being placed onto the Empowering Plans podcast, but the man cannot keep us down today because we know interesting topic today, and if the man was going to keep us down, it might be about this podcast. Nick, today we're going to talk about something that I found very interesting and something that I think is growing in the landscape of the healthcare industry, and we're going to be in the vein of alternative therapies today. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing across the country in an increase in the research and in some cases the approval of psychedelics for treating different types of mental health issues, whether it be PTSD in the case of some active or former military members, or addiction treatment, which is something that's near and dear to my heart because of my background and of where I'm from. But there is this groundswell of kind of support and clamoring for new involving different other than status quo therapies for mental health disorders. Nick, what are you seeing across the country just in the state of mental health in general, and what's going on? What kind of consulting questions are you seeing in this space?
Obviously, like one of the biggest topics that we've been fielding over the last couple of years is mental health parity, and that's been a big issue that a lot of plans, I think, have kind of slowly woken up to some of the potential concerns with their benefit design. It's a compliance obligation that got a little bit more juice in the wake of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, when the comparative analysis requirement got a little bit of a buff. Effectively, that's the requirement that FIA, you've heard FIA talk about a lot, listeners, just where the health plan, any self-funded health plan that provides mental health benefits will generally have to comply with the mental health parity rules. That means they'll have to provide, they'll have to be no more restrictive in the mental health benefits that they offer than they are in the medical and surgical benefits. So basically, plans have to be in parity between their medical and surgical side and then their mental health and substance use disorder side. And a big part of that was the non-quantitative treatment limitations, the NQTL requirements the plans put on their benefits. And this can take a lot of forms. Essentially, it's any kind of limit that doesn't necessarily have a hard number attached to it. And so we've been doing these comparative analyses for a lot of our groups over the last several years. And one of the things that we've seen a lot of groups still struggle with, and this is actually not really the group's fault inherently, but the network adequacy of mental health and substance use providers is really difficult to assess, and it's really difficult for plans to make sure they're in parity, because really, again, like the composition of the network and what networks they're able to access is really something that's kind of outside of the group's hands themselves. And a lot of that comes down to what some of the big networks across the country are willing to do. And not only have we kind of noticed that there's a dearth in the availability of mental health providers and different mental health and substance use disorder services, but a lot of the states, I think, have started to notice that too. And so that's sort of helped spur this kind of evolution of some of the more alternative therapies that you were alluding to there, Corey. And we've also seen states take some more aggressive action to kind of force plans and to force these provider networks to be more inclusive and more beneficial to mental health and substance use providers. Like Illinois, for example, I think in October passed a law essentially requiring networks to reimburse at comparable rates for mental health providers. That's one of the reasons you'll see a lot of mental health providers, they just flat out won't accept your coverage, won't be part of a network. There may be cash pay only, and it's because they don't make enough money off of what networks are willing to pay them. So you're seeing states now try to mandate that their network coverage be a little more generous to the mental health and substance use disorder side. And Illinois is also kind of doing some more interesting things on the actual benefits. Like we were seeing, I think Illinois basically was trying to establish, you mentioned, Corey, some of the opioid use disorder and how, relevant that is to your part of the country and some of your background. So we've seen a few states take some of the opioid settlement money out of some of the Sackler settlements, some of the big court cases you've probably seen in the news, taking some of that settlement money and finding ways to spend it on improving access to opioid treatment procedures. And one of those therapies is using psychedelics in a controlled medical environment to try to help manage some of those conditions like addiction, things like side effects from traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression. A lot of the more conventional therapies and treatments are not always accessible and are not effective for everyone. And we've seen a lot of states kind of making pushes to make some of the psychedelic therapies, maybe the less conventional therapies, a little more accessible, including in Illinois. We've seen pushes from states like Kentucky, I think, has had a press to kind of be a little more accommodating to the potential of psychedelics. California, Texas, a pretty diverse array of states have actually kind of seen some of the potential promise of psychedelic therapies and how they can help with this broad range of mental health and substance use conditions. So Corey, I think that was kind of what you were driving to there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Nick, as attorneys here, I think this is a perfect spot for just a disclaimer, right? Because you and I are a couple of guys. We're getting ready to talk about some things that I controversial, probably the most charitable way to put it, right? We're going to talk about some alternative therapies and why the reason why we're talking about them. Nick, you just hit on it. We're seeing I don't know if those of you listeners out here know this or not, but we live in a very partisan time right now, and it's very hard to find common ground with those who have differing viewpoints with us, and we can just park that there. But this particular push, specifically with a drug called ibogaine, which I'm going to talk about more in just a second, you're seeing states that are historically or currently opposite of each other when it comes to 99% of the social or physical issues coming together and investing resources, time, and interest in these treatments. And I think that's very, I think it's very telling, right? Anytime you have bipartisan support in this kind of climate, I think it's something that you should take note on. And I think there's a couple reasons for this, which you and I talked about a little bit off camera. But, traditionally, Democrats have pushed for expansive healthcare opportunities, providing more types of treatment, bringing things in and calling them medically related. And then on the Republican side, I think that's what they're doing here for the Democrats, right? This is another therapy. More access to care is better. Different care for different folks. I think that's a Democrat kind of issue. And then on the Republican side, you get to see a lot of support from the GOP because of the anecdotal evidence of former service members or current service members and veterans. We're going to talk a lot about the work that a gentleman named W. Brian Hubbard is doing, and he runs Americans for Ibogaine. Is kind of the lobbying apparatus that he runs. He's a fellow Kentuckian and is a wonderful guy, but he's partnered with Rick Perry, and you're getting this kind of support across the political aisle, specifically for this drug called ibogaine. Nick, before we started talking about this podcast, had you ever heard of ibogaine?
I honestly, I had never heard of ibogaine. I think whenever I've read about psychedelic therapies in the past, like I've read about studies into things like psilocybin, things like MDMA, even things like ketamine being used as uh, kind of a clinical way to sort of address some of these mental health and substance use disorder issues. But I had never really heard of ibogaine until you brought it up when we were talking about this pod.
Well, excellent. So I'm going to assume that most people listening, maybe this is the first time they've heard about this drug, or so I'm going to give a little bit of background on it, talk a little bit about what we're seeing at the state level with different legislation, and then we'll wrap it up with why this is an important topic for those that are helping administer health plans, right? Because that's what this podcast is about. If it was about things that I found interesting, it would be a very different type of podcast. But I do find this to be interesting, so it's a great crossroads here. So ibogaine is a plant-based medicine. It's derived. There's a couple different plants, mostly found in Africa, that I cannot pronounce the names of them, but that they can derive the active ingredient for ibogaine from. So already there, that should be, if you're paying attention to big pharma at all, how the lobby industry works, when I said that this is a plant-based therapy, you should already have your antenna up thinking about, well, this isn't going to be easy, because the last thing that we want, if you're a big pharma lobbyist, is any alternative to the status quo, right? And Brady and I did a podcast maybe a year ago on the Purdue pharma settlement, and I spoke my piece about that there. But ibogaine, plant-based treatment, it's a Schedule 1 narcotic here in the United States. So this is a
Well, heavily
illegal
regulated.
substance. Yeah. This is not a legal substance, but the reason we're talking about it right now is because there are 15 states that either have pending or passed legislation to invest in studying through clinical trials the success rate of ibogaine. Nick listed a lot of them there: California, Texas, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana. You have all these different states with different Illinois, you mentioned as well. Different states, different priorities, different voting population, but all these states come together and said, you know what? We need to investigate what this drug is and are there benefits here. For Kentucky, I could speak to this as an statistically. You mentioned the opioid settlement a little bit ago, Nick. Kentucky received $845 million from the settlement for the opioid epidemic, and part of that money was set aside to help children that were in families that were broken apart by addiction. Part of it were to help people to become non-addicted, and then another portion of that money was used specifically for research and development on different therapies. Because what a lot of people don't know, for opioid addiction, your most common therapy, medically speaking, is Suboxone or methadone, which are also just opioids. You are treating opioid addiction with other opioids. So this is a real snake eating the tail issue here. I know many people from my childhood, from my past. Eastern Kentucky was ravaged by this opioid epidemic, that have told me that Suboxone withdrawal was worse than withdrawing from heroin. So this is a big issue, right? So you have all these people who are addicted to opioids that have been hurt in a lot of different ways, and the most prevailing treatment that we have is more opioids that can be harder to come off of than heroin. That is not a good situation to be in. So W. Brian Hubbard, who I mentioned earlier, was actually heading up the opioid commission in Kentucky when he came across someone who had an experience, was a 12-year opioid addict, had gotten so far down that path that they moved out of the United States to Colombia to teach English as a second language, because Colombia has open pharmacy policies, because they didn't want to continue to risk buying drugs illegally. So they just moved to Colombia so they could buy opioids at an open pharmacy. And one day, this lady woke up, looked in the mirror, and realized that she was about to die, and she didn't want to live this way anymore. She did research and came across this thing called Ibogaine and recounted this story to Brian Hubbard that kind of changed his entire perspective on psychedelics. So, what is Ibogaine, right? What is this? How do you do it? So, many people who have used this drug, number one, not available in the United States. Again, we'll say that you're having to go to internationally. You're having to travel to a clinic somewhere where it is legal. Not gonna. There's no endorsement or condemnation. This is just a statement of fact. Um, and you go to a clinic, and it actually mirrors a lot of religious experiences. This Ibogaine treatment center, there's usually group therapy, there's usually sweat lodges that are being utilized before the administration of the drug, and then the drug is administered. And really, as someone who has not used psychedelics or hallucinogens, from what you can read from people who have taken Ibogaine, this is a not good experience. They are paralyzed, immobile for 14 to 18 hours, lots of nausea. But the experience they get after this, and there's also an hallucinogenic aspect of, you can go online, read accounts of people who say that the reason that this drug works is they get an entire new perspective on trauma in their life, why they do the things they do. There's, again, heavy religious kind of undertones of this, of meeting a being that showed them nothing but unconditional love for the first time in their life. And this kind of trip, for lack of a better term, takes place for 24 hours, 36 hours. And then coming off of this treatment, you can read story after story of veteran that have seen that's seen awful things, right? That have been in war, seen things that humans shouldn't process on a daily basis, but they were having to process this on a daily basis. And they come off this Ibogaine treatment and they say, my whole perspective on life has changed. I've thrown away every antidepressant, SSRI, anxiety medicine that I was on, and I am now a better, more full person because of this experience I've had. You hear opioid addicts, like the one I mentioned earlier, a 12-year addict that can never get off the stuff, go, and one administration of the dose of Ibogaine was enough to break that cycle and completely change her perspective on life and what she does and how she interacts. So up to this point, you're probably thinking like, oh, this is just a magic drug. There's nothing wrong. There's no negative side effects. That's not true. I think it is important. Any proponent for Ibogaine that you listen to is very clear. This is not like ayahuasca or LSD or something that may be done, or psilocybin for that matter, that could be done recreationally. This is a very harrowing experience that you're going through. It can also be dangerous. Ibogaine has the chance to send you into cardiac arrest, to stop your heart. These clinics that people are going to internationally, they're medical clinics. They're not spirit journeys or shamans. They're monitored by medical staff. Lots of times Ibogaine's given with other drugs like magnesium to kind of protect the integrity of your cardiovascular system. So this is not a for fun recreational drug, but it is a drug that has hallucinogenic effects, and somehow this hallucinogenic effect and the rewiring that takes place, people are describing it as a reset of their neuroplasticity to be able to cope with and deal with the underlying issues that lead them to be addicts or to have anxiety, or to help heal them from their traumatic brain injuries or whatever they went through that got them to this point. So again, I'm highlighting Ibogaine because I believe that this is the one that can catch maybe the most momentum. You're really having to cut through a lot of preconceived notions with some of these other psychedelics, right? When you say psilocybin, right? When you say DMT, people, recreational drugs is what comes to mind. Ketamine, right? I'm not saying that there's not medicinal values to all of this, but ibogaine doesn't have that kind of baggage, and we're kind of, that's why I think this one has I think health plan sponsors need to be aware of this, because this very well could become something that it becomes more open, and plan participants may want to partake as different states make different rulings, or if there's a change in the scheduling classification of ibogaine. Nick,
Yeah,
I've
it
talked for
does
a long
sound
time.
like a no, that's all really fascinating stuff. I think some of the big takeaways are, this drug particularly, but psychedelics more broadly. There's a lot of potential there, especially for treating patients that are really suffering with mental health and substance use disorders. Um, they're not necessarily a miracle drug. There's a lot of potential risks and concerns there. I think one of the big takeaways is that ibogaine and all the other psychedelics we've referenced here, those are all still very heavily regulated drugs. Some of the pushes we've been talking about are really states like Texas and Kentucky and California trying to expand state-funded research into ways to handle those drugs safely and in a medical environment. But I think, Corey, you're absolutely right that this is the kind of thing that we could see grow really quickly in years going forward as more and more, as it becomes more and more clear that access to mental health benefits and to substance use disorder benefits is something plans are going to perpetually struggle with. Something like this that sounds like it's effectively you do this treatment once, and that coupled with the detoxification and some other changes in a person's life, it's effectively one dose and can really like alter the course of their life and their need for things like opioid treatment drugs or for more long-term therapies, which could be a game changer for a lot of plans' mental health benefit design. But I think one of the things, again, to be mindful of is none of these drugs are FDA approved. Most of them, if you wanted to get them, you would have to go south of the border or elsewhere. Which means that these drugs would raise a lot of the same compliance considerations that plans face with any kind of off-label drug use, with any kind of medical tourism benefit. All of those have potential pitfalls that we've talked about in the past, but if you do have any more specific questions, you can always come to the FIA group. Our consulting team can answer all kinds of questions if you've got them. Corey, I didn't want to cut you off there, but it looked like you had a few more thoughts on.
No, I don't. You know what? We've been going for a while here. It's a fascinating topic. I would encourage anyone that is interested in this topic. I know a lot of people who are probably listening to this either have family members who have served in the military, or if not that, someone who's dealing with mental health struggles, or maybe an addict in the family. That's a very common occurrence now. If you're interested in this topic more than what Nick and I just did at a very high level, I would encourage you, again, the website americansforibogaine.org. That's where I pulled a lot of the information from to discuss on this podcast now. I think the reason, though, Nick, that I think that this is interesting is, again, you're going to see and I love medical breakthroughs, right? Medical breakthroughs are great, and I think that they can be things that help people who are hurting, and that's what medicine should be about. But for the plan sponsors out there, we want you to be aware of this as well, right? Because maybe you get an interesting question. What ibogaine? What is that? Medical tourism. We haven't had to deal with this before, and I have someone saying that for their mental health, they need to go to Tijuana and go to an experimental medical clinic. Now at least maybe you have a frame of reference, and if any questions come up in real life or in practice, you got no better attorney than Nick Bonds here that could answer your questions, and the whole FIA compliance department. So it does seem like we're at a little bit of inflection point here. You have the Make America Healthy Again movement that has lost a little bit of steam, but has still done, I think, some positive things with banning food dyes, and wanted to make Americans more healthy. I think more plant-based alternative medicine that shouldn't be something that scares anyone. We should be open to it. We should be open to new ideas. But again, we are only attorneys. We are only here to pontificate and maybe bloviate a little bit. We certainly aren't endorsing or condemning anything we talked about, but I do think it's something that's important right now, exiting 2025, to watch for in 2026. what are states going to do with Ibogaine? Nick, anything you want to say to the people before we send them on their way today?
No, I mean,
I'll
you summed
take
it up
that
pretty
as
well,
a no.
Corey. You summed it up pretty well, Corey. Again, we're not medical professionals. Please don't take any of this as medical advice, but we are excellent consultants. So if you have any other questions in this area or any of the potential pitfalls for plans trying to cover drugs that are heavily regulated, you can kind of think of it like covering, it's not quite there yet, but anytime you talk about covering a plant-derived medicinal product, you can sort of liken it to covering things like marijuana. Like it is, in some ways, in the States now, becoming ever more legal, but it's ultimately still a heavily regulated product at the federal level, and trying to cover that is not without a bevy of potential compliance concerns. So I think Corey's right. I think that this is something participants may be clamoring for in the future, and states seem like they're trying to find ways to make it safer and more viable here stateside, but we'll have to keep an eye on it. I think this is something that's got some legs. We'll see this kind of continue to develop in 2026 and beyond.
Couldn't have said it better myself. For Nick Bonds, I'm Corey Crigger. To everyone listening, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, however you celebrate. And I will not be on the podcast again until after the new year, so have a happy new year as well. This has been the Empowering Plans Podcast. Have a great day.
Take care.